All right, let's go ahead and get started at 6:03. Thank you everyone for coming to this meeting. I'm Lael Goodman. I work for North Brooklyn Neighbors. We've been following this issue for a number of years, as have many of you. We are holding this meeting in response to a notification that there is going to be a change in the plan. So I wanted to make sure that people have information on that as soon as possible. So today we're going to do welcome. We have a number of elected officials online today. Then we're going to have a presentation by the state DEC. Then we're going to have a presentation by Madison Realty Capital. And then we'll have a lot of time for question and answers. I just wanted to start off, first of all, besides saying thank you for coming, I also wanted to introduce briefly in response to some concerns that were raised at the last meeting. We contacted NYU and are working with a student there to actually do a health survey of the area surrounding NuHart. So I just wanted to introduce that researcher to you all today. She will, become a presence at these meetings and maybe contacting people to ask questions or learn from all of you in the meantime. So I just wanted to give her a chance to say hello. So Nicole, if you're there, please feel free to introduce yourself.
Great, thank you, Lael. Hi, everybody. As Lael said, my name is Nicole. I am a master's student and working as a researcher at NYU's Division of Environmental Medicine. I work in Dr. Judith Zelikoff's lab. She is also here. And I came on board a few months ago. So have been working with Dr. Zelikoff and Lael to determine a community project that we think would be most beneficial to the community surrounding the NuHart site. So in short, we are in early stages right now, but plan to conduct a health needs assessment survey of the community and also carry out some environmental sampling of the local area. Of course, we need input from the community members in order to make that happen. And this is in response to concerns that have been expressed by community members and the desire from community members to have some kind of formal health survey conducted. So please keep an eye out for any communications from me or Lael regarding this. I would immensely appreciate any of your input when it comes to surveys, distributing surveys, or helping provide any kind of sites for environmental sampling. Yeah, so keep your eyes peeled, and it's wonderful to meet you all. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. All right, so we have a number of elected officials who were instrumental in putting this meeting together. So I want to give them all a chance to speak. So Emily, you want to go ahead? Sorry.
Great.
Feel free, Assembly Member Gallagher.
Yeah, it's all right. Hi, I'm Assembly Member Emily Gallagher. I am really grateful for all of you showing up to this meeting and the rapid creation of the meeting. It's really nice to meet you, Nicole, and I'm really looking forward to learning from you and hearing about what you discover in the area. Yeah, this is a really vital site for us to keep our eyes on. My office is very focused on the DEC and helping out with this kind of remediation concern. We are very involved in this issue, also the Meeker plumes and the Newtown Creek cleanups. So it's absolutely imperative that this gets cleaned up. I'm grateful for the cleanup that's happened so far. And I'm also really grateful to, Jane O'Connell and the developer and everybody for coming together and flagging what we're going to talk about tonight. So thanks to Lael and NBN. You're all doing great work, and I think together we're going to find the right way to get this taken care of. So I'm here to help. I have another meeting to attend in the middle of this meeting, but my Chief of Staff, Andrew, is going to stay on the whole time. I'm also going to come back as I can after I make an appearance at the other meeting. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. And I see that Councilmember Ressler is also on. Go ahead.
I am. I travel in a pack with Emily and Kristen. Fortunately for me, we're, I think, all just really happy to be helping to bring this together with you, Lael, and North Brooklyn neighbors and the DEC. You know, we've been having these meetings regularly, and frankly, we've all in the neighborhood been working on the cleanup of NuHart for many, many, many years. And we're fortunate that we have a regulator who's overseeing the cleanup in the DEC, who is kind of nimbly, thoughtfully, and effectively. And we've really appreciated the communication and coordination with Jane and the DEC team. You know, identified a path forward to make her sensible. But we wanted to have this meeting, you know, immediately when we found out about the modifications to the cleanup plan. Each of you who are most impacted in immediate proximity to NuHart could offer insights and share your expertise with Zach and his team, who have, I think, done an admirable job of making themselves available and accessible, and have been responsive to concerns from each of our offices and from the community. Like Emily and I think Kristen, we all have we're double booked on the same schedule. But Kelly from my team, who's our awesome new community advocate for the neighborhood, is on. And anything that we can do to help, or any questions that we can help follow up on, you can count on us to do so. So thank you, Lael, and appreciate everybody for being on with us tonight.
Great, thank you so much. And we also have State Senator Kristen Gonzalez. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lael. Actually, I think the council member summed it up perfectly. So just want to echo that. I know we want to get started. I do want to shout out Catherine, who is my chief of staff on this call. So because we have the same conflict, she will be here, but I'll also try to hop on at the end. But thank you all so much for joining, and definitely looking forward to receiving a report back and all the comments.
Okay, great. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Jane with DEC to begin the presentation.
Hi, everyone. Jane O'Connell from New York State DEC. I'm going to share my screen and run through a hopefully brief presentation. So again, we're talking about the former NuHart plastic manufacturing, the state Superfund portion of the site. I'm going to give you just a brief outline of what we've done to date, where we stand right now, talk about some of the excavation endpoint sample results that were received, and then I'm going to go into a little bit of the proposed alternative remedy element that Madison and DEC have been discussing. And then finally, I'll talk about DEC process timing and next steps. So just to orient everyone, the Superfund portion, this is an aerial view. North is to the top, Clay Street is here. The Superfund portion of the site is the blue outline here. To the right is the former NuHart East, which was remediated under the brownfield cleanup program. And as you can see, there's already the structure is already going up there. And the eastern half of the state Superfund site, the excavation has been completed, and the tent is now moved over to the western half. So again, NuHart East, the brownfield cleanup program site, that remediation was completed. We issued a certificate of completion in December. and the superstructure installation is in progress. On the eastern half of the NuHart Superfund site, the remedial excavation is completed. The tent has been relocated and the building construction has started on the eastern half of the Superfund site. On the western half, the remedial excavation target depth was about 16 feet below grade. And they got to the bottom of the excavation 16 feet below grade. They did their testing. They still had non-aqueous phase liquid or NAPL. And it was mostly limited to the southwestern portion of the site, which is where the prior plume epicenter was located. They further excavated to depths of ranging from 18.5 to 21.5 feet until they didn't observe any more of the NAPL. However, the endpoint sample results indicated that there were still elevated concentrations of phthalates in the soil at these deeper depths. And again, this is about 4.5 feet to 5 feet below the original anticipated excavation depth. So just in this figure, just to highlight the yellow sample results are the ones that we were still concerned about. So they're in this area here along the western and southern end of the site. So I'm sure the first question is, why can't we dig some more? The supportive excavation, that sheet pile wall that was put around the entire site, was designed for a maximum excavation depth of 19 feet below grade. That sheet pile SOE, supportive excavation, goes down to about 34 feet below grade. But just because it goes down to 34 feet doesn't mean we can dig down to 34 feet. There is a limit at which the structural integrity of that SOE would be compromised, and they've reached that limit right now. What that means is that if we dig any deeper, we could compromise the SOE, we could compromise the structural integrity of the tent. In addition to that, we would have to redesign the whole dewatering system. And the concern is that dewatering any further, any more than what we have right now, could induce offsite drawdown of groundwater and potential settling issues. So Madison and DEC have been talking over the last couple of weeks to a month about what is an alternative that we can do to address those remaining contaminants. And again, those remaining contaminants extend maybe about 4 to 5 feet below the current excavation depth. So what we've come up with is something called in situ solidification, ISS. This is a technology that was evaluated as part of the original feasibility study back in 2016. It can be accomplished without a major redesign of the supportive excavation, but it will require some additional bracing on the interior of that SOE. And I'm going to show you a picture in a bit that shows sort of what we're talking about, that cutoff wall. What the proposal is they would be using a mixture of hydrated 20% type 3 Portland cement. What does that mean? It means it's like concrete. They're going to basically mix the soil with concrete. It would be accomplished by auger mixing. And as of today, they're undergoing pilot testing for this on the site. DEC has been out there overseeing this pilot testing. So again, this figure, this sort of overlays, these are the sample locations where we still had the phthalates in that previous figure. What these different color codes show are the different depths to which they're going to be proposing to do this ISS. So the purple that's shown here is going to go down to about 23.5 feet. The green box here would go down to about 22.5 feet. And this orange here would go down to about 25 feet. And again, just for reference, the bottom of the cutoff wall is about 34 feet below grade. So this is a photo. These are a couple of photographs, and I'm going to try and zoom in on these. This is a view inside of the tent as it stands right now. So around the exterior of the tent, and this is looking towards the southwest corner of the site, which is the northeast corner of DuPont and Franklin. So if I zoom in on this a little bit, you'll see this is that sheet piling. And we're down about, like I said, between 18 and 21 feet below grade right now. This sheet piling extends another 12 to 15 feet below this. But the structural integrity of this would be compromised if we dig out any more soil along the edge of this. So this was some photographs we took just the other day when we were out there overseeing the pilot testing. And what they're doing in this pilot test is there are little cells. So you can see a couple of them here. There's one here, there's one here. And again, they can't do all of this all at once. They have to do it in sort of cells, again, because of the structural integrity of this this cutoff wall here. This is sort of a close-up of what does one of the cells look like as they're doing this mixing. So this is over here is just what the soil looks like, and then this is what it looks like after they mixed in the concrete. So I'm going to go to the next slide, which has, hopefully I can I show this video? It's not letting me show the video. Hold on a second. I want to go back to, give me 1 second. I'm just going to stop sharing. I'm sorry. Let me back to this. Okay. I'm going to end the slideshow and I'm going to go to this and I'm going to share again.
In the meantime, I just wanted to also say that I neglected to mention that Dan Wiley from Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez's office is also here. So just
All
wanted
right,
to say
so
that.
see if
Thanks,
I can.
Lyle.
So this is just, what does this thing look like? It's basically going down and mixing concrete and binding up the soil. So this is what it's going to look like. I'm sorry about the camera work. Apologies. Okay, so again, what we're talking about here is essentially encapsulating whatever soil is still contaminated and solidifying it into a solid mass of concrete. So that's sort of what the concept is. What the process is for us to go through this process of changing the remedy. Because the record of decision required the removal of all this non-aqueous phase liquid, which is infeasible, they're going to be proposing, after they complete the pilot test, they will give us a formal report of the results of the pilot test. So far, what we're seeing is promising. They're going to give us a formal report on that. But the anticipated depth would be approximately 4 feet below the current excavation depth. And it's about 1,900 cubic yards of material. But this change is going to require what's called a record of decision, a ROD amendment. So once the pilot test is completed, consultant would submit a formal design request to us. We're anticipating that would probably be in late February. I'm sure Zach will say he wants it to be tomorrow, but that's how it is. DC then has to prepare a ROD amendment, which has to be issued for a 30-day public comment period. So again, we're targeting March to April for that public comment period. During that public comment period, DEC would have a formal public meeting at which we would solicit comments. And then following the completion of the comment period and a response to written comments, DEC would issue the ROD amendment approval. Again, we'd anticipate that to be April to May of 2024. All right, so that's sort of the 50-cent tour of what's been going on at NuHart. I'll turn it back to you, Lael.
Great, thanks, Jane. So as I said in the chat, we're gonna hold questions until after Zach presents, after Madison Realty presents, unless you have anything that's really just a clarifying question. So go ahead, Zach, if you want to start presenting. And we are going to have people, raise hands once this is over in the question and answer, but that doesn't mean you can't put questions in the chat for us to answer if we can, or for other people to
Okay.
ping off of. So go ahead, Zach.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Lael, North Brooklyn neighbors, and all the electeds that made time on short notice to gather the community to discuss the changes at NuHart. I really wish I went first. It's so hard to follow Jane, but I will go. So a lot of the stuff you'll see, Jane already went through, and we can go through questions after the presentation. So let's see. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So again, a similar bird's eye view of the site. On the right-hand side, NuHart East, a little bit more specificity. We got the certificate of completion for the brownfields. The building is topped out, windows are starting to go in, and we are hoping to be in a position to occupy that building about a year from now. On the Superfund portion, as Jane had mentioned, portion A highlighted here, the foundation is complete, and so is the ground floor slab. And then portion B, where the tent is located, you just saw live pictures, is the area that we're really here to talk about today. So again, a quick update. Obviously in the rod, we expected to go about 16 feet. We dug, 2.5 to 5.5 feet deeper in various grids or cells, as Jane had mentioned. And unfortunately, due to the depth of the sheet piles, we really couldn't dig any further. So we explored all alternate options with the team, and really the only solution is to mix in place, as Jane mentioned, with concrete, these 11 grids that are called out in orange. As Jane mentioned, there's still the public DEC process, and sort of this mixing is at risk, but we believe, based on the pilot test results, that this will be successful and the best solution for all. Just quickly, after the ISS is complete, the tent comes down. Once the tent is removed, the foundation, which will be another sort of cap on top of the ISS, will be installed, and the rest of the structure will be completed. And sort of in parallel, the DEC and the ROD amendment and the timeline that Jane laid out a couple of minutes ago. And again, Capolino's been on board. My team's been very involved. We've collaborated with most of the electeds, North Brooklyn neighbors, and a lot of our neighbors. We've tried to be as responsive as possible to community concerns. And obviously this has been, a little bump in the road, but we see light at the end of the tunnel to clean up NuHart, which is, long time coming. And now we should just turn it over, I guess, to the larger group to ask any questions and talk about the presentation tonight.
Great, thank you very much. And I also do want to say, while I'm waiting for people to raise their hands, so North Brooklyn Neighbors has a grant from DEC, and we have a consultant who has looked at some of the technical aspects of, some of the previous things as part of this, and he will also be taking a look at this amendment. So I just wanted to say that we will have that outside expert looking at it. And, he hasn't gotten details of it before that, so he doesn't have, anything to say today, but we can share some information later. So Steve Chesler, I see your hand is raised. Go ahead.
Thank you, Lael. Thanks a lot, everyone, for this meeting. Very, very important, obviously. I'm the chair of the Environmental Protection Committee at Committee Board 1. In exploring options, was putting in support beams explored, where shore up the, I guess the walls of the pit. You see like at construction sites to prevent the pit from collapsing and buildings collapsing next door to a site, which potentially, I guess, would enable full remediation of the NAPL.
So, I mean, if we went back to Jane's photo, some of that additional bracing was not part of the original plan that we added to dig deeper. But ultimately, we basically added as much bracing, given the existing site conditions, the water level, and all these other varying factors, that it became no longer feasible to truck out the remaining contaminant cells. And that's why we're at this, this is the best solution forward. So that was, remember, like the 16 feet, and then we already went 2.5 to 5.5 feet deeper in various locations, which in order to do that, we had to add additional steel.
Steve, also it's an important note is that the supportive excavation, the steel sheeting also serves as the anchor for the tent structure itself. So if you continue to dig down, you start undermining the integrity of that actual tent, and you could have the failure of the structure, which would be a very bad thing for this project and this neighborhood.
Okay, I guess that makes sense. Well, then I guess kind of another question coming out of it is risk in terms of, vapor intrusion in the residences of future tenants, the risk versus, the original remedy versus this proposed amendment to the remedy. Can talk about the risk factor in terms of contamination going forward.
So, Steve, I can speak to that a little. I think DOH on the call, they can probably chime in as well. But the phthalates are not. There was no vapor concern related to the phthalates. The vapor concern was related to the chlorinated solvents that were on the northeast portion of the site. All of those, the chlorinated solvent contamination was able to be excavated out. There's also a contingency for some additional groundwater treatment that's going to start on the north side of the site next week. So in terms of, being a concern about exposure or vapor intrusion from the solidified mass, vapor, it was not a vapor concern to begin with. The phthalates are very, very stable. They're not volatile materials. And I see Scarlett is on from DOH. So if you want to add anything, Scarlett, but in terms of vapor exposure, it's not an exposure concern. In terms of direct contact exposure, it's not, it would, this mass would be 20 feet to 25 feet underground. So there's no direct contact, but essentially the purpose of this is that you're making this material so that it's no longer, water can't flow through it to leach out anything. It can no longer serve as a source of contamination.
Right. I mean, honestly, Jane, you pretty much said it right there, is that we're not concerned with VOC contamination there because it's phthalate contamination. So the in situ stabilization would not actually have a continuing vapor concern because there wasn't one to begin with in that area. And even if there were volatiles associated with that, in situ stabilization binds it together so that vapor intrusion is generally mitigated by that as well. So as Jane said, it's at depth. It's not something we would expect anyone to come in contact with, and it needs to be addressed. So this looks like a viable solution in order to address it if structural issues prevent us from getting it out. So, we definitely want it to be addressed by the remedy in a way that is protective of public health and the community around as well.
Okay, thank you.
So there's a question in the comments. Heather asks, so the concrete is mixed with the NAPL to solidify it, but it will not be removed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it will become part of the building foundation, she asks.
No, it will not be part of the building foundation. The building foundation would be built above it, and it would be a different type of concrete, a different structural element.
And so how will the NAPL that's left interact with the concrete
So the napple under the street, I'm looking at your comment right now, Heather. The napple that's under the street, if you recall back when we were doing the record of decision, we're not able to dig up the napple that's under the street because of all the utilities and everything else. Part of this remedy that we weren't really talking about because it wasn't affected by this particular issue is that the offsite, the plume that's under the streets and the sidewalks, that is going to be there's going to be a series of recovery wells that are installed around outside of the sheet pile wall, and that all that recovery will continue, until we get all of as much as we can out of the ground outside of the sheet pile. But in terms of interacting with the concrete, remember the sheet pile wall is watertight. So the napple that's outside of that wall will not migrate back into the site after this remedy is completed.
Is that because, sorry, just because it floats on the top of the groundwater, so it wouldn't go under the 34 depth?
Correct.
what you're
Right now
saying.
they're dewatering inside the sheet piling. So the water table inside the sheet piling is lower than the water table outside the sheet piling. So outside the sheet piling, the napple that's floating on the water is, I don't know, 15 feet down. And it can't get through that wall. They're not dewatering outside so that they would pull that contamination down below the depth of the sheet piling.
And Laura asks, and also if anyone wants to raise their hand and ask themselves, feel free. So will all the napple be reached when mixing with concrete to solidify it? And this is, I assume, inside the footprint, or will some of it be left unmixed?
The goal is to mix all of it, and so DEC we've done in situ stabilization on a number of sites statewide. It's a very effective technology, but we also have a very robust quality assurance, quality control process. So part of what they're going to have to do is prove to us that, when they're done with this, that they've gotten everything mixed in. Everything has been ISS'd, if you will.
So I guess I have some questions while I'm waiting for, Laura asks, what happens if it can't all be mixed in?
If it can't all be mixed in, we'd be looking at maybe potentially another ROD amendment to determine what we could do at that point. But I think our goal is to try to mix all of what we have the soil samples that we know have to be mixed. We have all of those going down, down to, I think, James, you took samples down to about 25 or 30 feet. And so we know what the depth is that has to be mixed, and the process that they've put in place is designed to be able to mix to that depth.
I saw a hand up. Councilmember Ressler, did you have a question?
It's okay. You should ask yours, Leo. I bet they're smarter.
Okay. So I guess I saw when Madison Realty was presenting, Zach, you were saying that some things would be happening concurrently. So I just have questions about the timeline, like is work going to start before the ROD amendment goes through? Does it not happen until after the ROD amendment happens? And how does that all work?
Jane, do you want to answer or you want me to answer?
Me or Jane?
Sure,
So the work, again, the work is happening right now as the pilot, and then the pilot is working into the full scale, which we're using a 20% mixed design. So as of right now, the work that's happening is the actual solidification process of the phthalates that are remaining in soil. And concurrently to the site work is going to be the ROD amendment process. So we're waiting for some results to come back from the curing. We will finalize the ROD amendment letter to the state. And then Jane, in her presentation, mentioned that they're going to start the public comment process.
I guess I'm just like wondering about like how it works with public input. Like does this start going ahead before the public comment period is over? And if so, I guess how does that jive with all
I
of
think, yeah,
that?
Leo, I think there's a few things. Like I mentioned, like there is an at-risk component here, right? DEC technically has to go through the ROD amendment, the public comment period, and then the formal ROD amendment. Given sort of the situation and also some of the other constraints in the back end with 421A and stuff like that, sort of my ass and our asses are on the line to figure this out. Otherwise, the remediation can't be completed. So there's a sort of this parallel track of there's really not another option given the site conditions. But we have to go through the motions, and that was part of the reason of why we wanted to get in front of the community and work with the electeds as quickly as possible. So that's why we're here to talk about it. And sort of, the pilot's going on, then the work proceeds, and then there's sort of the administrative regulatory parallel process.
So there's, I guess, other questions about timelines. Maggie and Heather, if that didn't answer your question, feel free to chime in again. But Maggie asks, how does this impact the project completion timeline? And if you could say a little bit more about the 421A conversation.
Yeah, so 421A, I mean, there's a few major hurdles we're up against right now that we're fighting against. One is obviously the draconian deadline of June 2026, June 15th, to get TCO for all dwelling units. But the other is also there's other sort of construction milestones that have been structured into the construction loan that if we don't achieve certain, let's say, foundation completion or top out of the building by a certain date, there's a massive pay down to the lender, which also makes the project not feasible. So we are already probably 60 to 90 days behind schedule. And, I don't want to say right this moment in jeopardy, like we still see a path forward and light at the end of the tunnel, but that is why time is of the essence. When you look at the ROD, right, there was an estimated, I think exposure about 20 million bucks on the cleanup. I think so far we're probably into it for about 40. So, there's obviously been a lot of unknowns, and we still are here to work together to push forward. But that's just sort of the reality of where we are in this, the last 5 yards of getting into the end zone for the cleanup to be completed.
Another question that I have, in absence of seeing any hands, everyone else feel free to chime in. I don't want to take up all the time. So I know we talked a little bit about some of the well testing for the areas that are outside of the property itself in terms of like what's under the street and things like that. Would any of the recovery efforts there affect things that are inside the site, or those two are totally separate?
I can speak to that. I think so. The cutoff wall, like I said, would prevent any of the contamination that's still outside under the street and the sidewalk from getting back into the site. But at the same time, the remedy, and this is something that I think James's team is still working on, is the design for the recovery system that will have to be incorporated into the construction phase. We have not seen that formal design yet. We know they're working on it, but we haven't seen it yet. So I can't speak to what the details of that are going to be, but the recovery that would happen outside of the cutoff wall would not include dewatering. So there's no intent to lower the water table outside such that it might then migrate underneath the cutoff wall. Is that, I don't know if that's answering your question. I'm not sure if I understood it correctly, but.
Partially, I guess I'm just wondering if there's any contamination left. Is there a similar way to do any kind of remediation similar to what's being done outside.
Again, ISS out in the street and the sidewalk, we have the same issue as excavation. The spaghetti of utilities that are out there, and it would not be feasible to do ISS out in the street and the sidewalk. So we're kind of left with just recovering the product outside the wall as we can.
Okay, I'm gonna pop over to Councilmember Wrestler, who I see his hands up.
Great. Thanks, Leo. I just, I want to just a comment and a question. I think that from my vantage point, the very worst case scenario here would be that we have a 80% or whatever the right interval is completed cleanup that doesn't get done, and that we would be left with in kind of midstream not having a resolved situation for the cleanup of this site. We have worked with different ownership groups over extended periods of time to try to get this cleaned up, and the end is in sight. And I really want to make sure that we do everything we can as a community and with DEC and with Madison Realty to get this site cleaned up comprehensively and properly. If work were to happen at risk, as was discussed, like what are the oversight mechanisms that we have in place to make sure that things are done correctly? Could Jane or Zach, could you speak to kind of what assurances the community has that the alternative modified approach that had been previously considered that may that was described here tonight would be done correctly?
So Jane can go into more, specifics,
Go ahead, Zach.
but all week DEC has been in the tent with us. And the plan is for them to oversee the implementation of the ISS. So I think Monday, luckily or unfortunately, depending how you look at it, I wasn't there myself, but I think there was 5 or 6 representatives from DEC in the tent.
It was about 10 of us.
10 of us, sorry. And then every single day, there's been a member of DEC there with the field team, making sure that this is done correctly.
I also want to say that we looked at this as an alternative when the feasibility study was drafted. I wrote the feasibility study at my previous firm. And this was a very viable option that we were really evaluating at that time. It's a very proven technology. It's used widely around not only the New York City area, but the nation. It is very effective at locking in any residual contamination that is left. And it could have been theoretically the remedy for this site.
And they're using it, not to, distract from this, but they're using it in Gowanus, right? In a few sites?
Yeah, it's
Correct.
very commonly used at manufactured gas plant sites because it can be used very effectively, and you can use it at depth. But just to Lincoln, to answer part of your question, so yeah, DEC will be providing oversight of this. As I said, because we've used ISS a lot, we have a very, very robust QA/QC process. And the risk, and I've explained this to Zach, the risk is if that QA/QC comes back and this stuff is they didn't do it right, they've got to go back and do it again, right? So he's well aware of that, and I think that's he's put the screws to his contractors and stuff, and we're watching them very carefully and making sure that they're doing this properly.
Steve, I think you put your question in the chat, but do you want to just go ahead and ask it?
Yeah, if there's some sort of affordable housing program that is passed in the state legislature, is that something you could take advantage of, or are you locked into 421A?
This question's been asked by many people. The reality is just where things stand today and the time and pressure and where the milestones are with the construction loan. This is we're locked into this current program and we need to just make sure we sort of survive. I'm looking at survival right now.
Oh, go ahead, Julie.
I have a question, and it's beyond site specific to what's being built. If the contamination is substantially deeper than was expected, is the plume substantially wider than expected? I just think like that's really deep for it to go. What is the nature of the park across the street that the kids play at? Like, do we know how much contamination is in that whole general area?
We have monitoring wells that are around the edges of the plume, and those have been being monitored since I think 2011. We have not seen any lateral migration. So to answer that question, the plume has not moved. What we think is going on here is, so in order to excavate down below the water table, they had to lower the water table. And we think what happened was when they were lowering the water table, this stuff is very viscous. It just, it just mixed in with the soil as the water table was lowering. So essentially what we're dealing with now is, and again, that's why we're confident that we know exactly how deep this goes, and the soil borings that James and his crew did sort of bore this out, that the contamination goes down to where the current water table is, which is about 23 to 25 feet below grade, but again, above the depth of that cutoff wall. I don't know if does that answer your question, Julie?
That answers my question. Where are the wells? Is there a map or a location of where the wells are in the neighborhood?
Yes, I don't know if one of the figures that I showed has the map, the wells on it. Let me just look here. I don't have the well map here, but I think Lael, you should have a copy of it's in the ROD and the and all the documents, but I can send you a link, or maybe you could put up the link, Lael, for our DEC info locator. And all of the documents are in there, and there is a figure in there that has the locations of the wells. Yes.
Thank you.
I just want to add just a little bit to that, because I know you were concerned about the park, but if this contamination is at depth 20, 25 feet down, it's not something we would expect anyone to come in contact with at the park or nearby, but it still needs to be addressed, but it's not something that we'd expect to affect that area at the surface.
I guess the question, and I understand, but there's always like, events of flooding or, rising groundwater, things like that. So I think I know I personally, if my child was playing on the playground, would want to make sure that even in events like that, there wasn't contamination. Yeah. So in the chat, Laura asks, when were well samples last taken at Barge Park?
I don't think we have any wells at Barge Park, not related to this site. There may be wells out there related to Greenpoint Landing as part of their remediation under OER's program, but we did not have any monitoring wells related to NuHart at Barge Park.
And Heather asks, and I think we kind of covered this, but I think it's worth repeating. She asks, so the mixing process will not begin until the ROD amendment is approved around May, from what was mentioned earlier.
No,
and I think that's incorrect, right? It will start earlier.
it's underway now, right, with the pilot program, and then hopefully good results and right into the production phase.
We also had a question from Margot in the chat about if MRC can't complete the project, what happens to the remediation?
Thank you.
I guess Jane takes over.
Yeah, I mean, we're left with a hole in the ground, and we've got the state would have to take it over. In order for that to happen, we'd have to go through our process, and Lincoln's unfortunately very familiar with this. We'd have to go through a rather lengthy process of identifying any potentially responsible parties who could pay for that remediation before we could spend state Superfund money. So that would not be good.
So that would mean, just to play out that scenario a little bit more. So the development that's already occurring would remain as it is and people would be able to move in, but the west site would then, the entire west site would then come under DEC authority, or just the part that's under the tent currently? Or is that
That's a
just-
good question. I mean, I don't know. Would we reclassify the east part of the site as no longer being a Superfund site because they've already completed the remediation there? I don't know the answer to that question. We'd have to, you know, that's not a path that we're hoping to take. So those would all be questions that would have to be worked out.
Okay, and Judy from the chat asks, will the cement be mixed on site? And what percentages of components will be used? It makes a difference for adherence of contaminants and porosity. And Dr. Zelikoff is one of the researchers that we work with at NYU on environmental health.
So James, you want to talk about the cement mix?
Yep.
I also think Jay showed that video, right?
Yeah, the video, but she's asking about the percent and what the ratio of the mix is, I think.
Yep.
Yes.
So yeah, the Portland cement mixture is being mixed on site. There's a concrete mixing plant which is located outside of the tent, and then it is piped in through the tent and attached to the mixer. And then the confirmation of the mix ratio is done in the field. So it's done in the field through slump tests, and then it's also done through lab tests. So as the concrete cures and sets, it is sent to the lab for compressibility, strength, and permeability to confirm that we have met the specific ratios for this site. And then from there are coring at 4 locations, which are usually done after the curing process is completed, where we are confirming the thickness of the actual monolith that has been created.
And that's all laid out. Those are all tests that are required as part of that QA/QC requirements that I mentioned earlier.
Thank you. While I have the floor, I have another question. Will there be any follow-up in terms of testing and measurements over the years?
So there is, as I mentioned earlier, and again, Dr. Zirloff, I don't know how you're familiar you are with the site and the record of decision. There's still this off-site plume that there'll be recovery efforts going on for that for several years. The requirements for continued monitoring outside of the site will continue under a site management plan.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with it. So are we talking about yearly? Are we talking?
No, it would be much more frequent than that. Right now, I think, and James, correct me if I'm wrong, you're still gauging those wells. Are you still doing it monthly?
Yep, still monthly.
Yep. So they've been checking the wells all around the site on a monthly basis since, like I said, 2011. And part of that was to confirm that the plume was no longer migrating down gradient. But once we start the recovery efforts, the NAPL recovery outside, yes, it would be continuous monitoring going on during that effort.
Monthly?
It might even be more frequently than that, depending on how quickly or how effectively the recovery wells are working.
Okay, thank you.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get my head around it. So you're talking about the different levels on the outside of the, and by the way, I'm familiar with in situ stabilization from Gowanus, as they did that technique because you can't they couldn't, dredge all, all the way down and get all of the stuff. And then there's like certain layers they put on top of that. So I was just curious between the in situ stabilization part and then where does the foundation start, and what separation is there? Is it all just concrete that goes above that? And a related question is, I assume you're saying that the phthalates float, so
They
that
do,
if
yeah.
the water table is down 15 feet on the outside of the wall, and then on the inside you're going down like 23 or 25 feet that's dewatered, doesn't that make more pressure for the water table that's higher on the outside for the stuff to try to migrate in, even though you have this cutoff wall?
So I'm going to answer your second question first, because I think that bears repeating. So the part of the issue with not being able to excavate any deeper is because that cutoff wall is holding back the migration of the contamination that's outside the site from getting in. The structural stability of that is crucial to prevent that stuff from getting back in. There's certainly hydrostatic pressure on the outside of that wall. That's what all that bracing and that supporting is sort of holding it up. But when they're done with their foundation, the dewatering that's happening on the inside would be turned off, and the water table would come back to the same elevation that it is outside the wall. And I don't know if I followed your first question.
So ancillary to that, then the water table then comes back up. So the foundation then goes down, not below the water table.
The foundation would be below the water table. The final foundation would be.
So how deep is the bottom of the final foundation?
16 feet, I think. Is that right, Zach?
Yeah, correct.
The
So
water
not
table's
much.
about
So
14
not much.
feet.
Yeah. So not
Yeah,
much
yeah.
below the water table.
Not much.
Got
So
it.
even though we excavated all this, we basically have to build it back up with like RCA and then do all the waterproofing and rebar and then concrete.
So that's to answer that. Now I remember what your first question was. To answer your question, right? So they'd be doing the ISS down at 18 to 24 feet, something like that. They then have to bring in clean material to bring the site up to the development grade, and then pour the slab on top of that. Once they have enough weight on top of that slab, they would stop the watering. The water table would rise back to its natural state.
So like the final takeaway is that then the separation between the stuff that's bound up in situ stabilization and the bottom of the foundation has other stuff between it.
Yes.
Right? Has more concrete between it. How many feet of concrete between it?
I don't know that it'll be concrete. I think they'd use some type of fill, probably. I think
Clean
you said
fill.
recycled concrete aggregate, something
Correct.
like that. Something that would be structurally stable to fill in that 5 or 7 or 8 feet between the ISS monolith and the bottom of the slab.
Correct.
And Dan, if I can just add a little bit to that, the Gowanus Canal, some of that material they did ISS or in situ stabilization along in the canal itself. That's a bit of a different environment than this is, and a different structure. So when they put material on top of that, a lot of that is for sort of restoring habitat almost too, which is a little bit different. So that's clean material there, which, depending on things some of it may wash out. They may need to put more in and whatnot, but it's a little bit of a different reason for that material on top than the material on top here.
Right. I guess that. Yeah, I guess that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess the clean material you're putting between the in situ stabilization and then where the foundations start would be porous. So water then could come back into that.
The cutoff wall is not going away. That's staying there.
Right.
Even after the development is done. So whatever water comes back up, it would come up from below, not laterally.
And the in situ stabilization is supposed to keep the contaminants from coming back up with that water coming back up.
Correct. It would not, the water would not go through that. That's why one of the QA/QC criteria is permeability. They have to test to make sure that that is a solid monolith so that water would not percolate through that and get contaminated again.
But if you had like 1 or 2 holes, it could just come through 1 or 2 holes, right?
But that's why this robust QA/QC is, it's not just they have to prove that that they've mixed the entire mass, right? There's 4 different things. They've got to do strength, permeability. They've got to show that they've thoroughly mixed it. That would be through the coring and also the depth. So we have, if they miss anything, they've got to go back in and redo it. That's why we have all that QA/QC requirements on that.
We still have, this meeting is scheduled to go until 7:30, so we still have some time if people want to raise their hand or ask other questions. But until then, I've just asked that we go over the projected timeline again as we close down. That would be helpful both for the work that's going to be done and also public comment, public meetings. And I know it's all a little bit up in the air, but if we could just go over that one more time, that would be.
So we are waiting for the results of the initial pilot test. James can speak to when he's expecting to get all the lab results back. So there's the lab results and then there's the coring. Once they have all that data, they have to submit to us a formal remedial design, if you will, of this ISS. Once DEC has that in hand, we then prepare the ROD amendment and we put that out for the formal public comment period. So all of this depends on when we get the pilot test results from Haley and Aldrich.
And
Yep.
so, oh, go ahead.
The first set of results is supposed to come back tomorrow or early next week. And then the last set of results, hopefully by mid to the end of next week. So then from there, we could take all those results and finalize our ROD amendment letter and send it in.
Okay. And so I guess and I know I kind of talked about this a little bit before, but if the public comment period is open after the work's being done, the only thing that, like, if there's something brought up in the public comment period, there is a chance that the construction would have to go back and change something? Or I guess what's the use of the public comment period if the work is already going ahead?
Well, we've told Madison Realty
it's
that
at risk, right?
the risk is, there's a risk that we get a comment that says we've got to rethink this. What the likelihood of that is pretty low, but yes, that is the risk that they're taking. If
But the
something comes
alternative
in that
is,
requires
I can't
us
wait
to, yeah.
because of all these other 421A political financial pressures. So I'm already delayed, and it's either we go or I stop now, and the 10 stays forever, or till the process plays out.
Stays forever. Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth,
It'll feel like forever.
we're here talking about public comment, so I think it's just worth letting people know whether their comments, if they take the time to do it, if it may have any effect on the process. So I just wanted to double check.
They absolutely can affect the process, and that's the risk that Madison's taking.
Okay. So we do have another comment that came in the meantime. Heather asked, what is the shelf life of the end of the Napple concrete slab? If the water table convects over it, will it eventually crack decades down the line?
So I can't speak to the shelf life, but the mixed concrete, the reason we do all these different quality assurance, quality control testing on ISS is specifically for that question, right? The idea is that the ISS, that the concrete itself binds up the material. So even if in the future there's a crack in that concrete monolith, the material itself is still bound up in the concrete. It is not available to be I don't know what the right word is, to mix, if you will, with the groundwater. It is solidified and stabilized. So it serves two purposes. It's solidification. It's also stabilization. So could it crack decades down the line? Potentially, but again, the phthalates themselves would still be bound up in that concrete, even if the concrete cracks.
Okay. I think we're getting to the end of the questions. So I'm just gonna put up a slide that has contact information. As I said, we are recording this. We'll make this available. We usually, you know, do a write-up of it. Here's the contact information for, you know, all the people that have been involved in the process. Feel free to reach out. But it sounds like we will be hearing from DEC fairly soon if, you know, the results are coming back in the next couple of weeks. And I guess there will be an additional time to ask questions, kind of in a format probably similar to this. But thank you everyone for coming. People are sharing things in the chat, and I think, you know, we'll have to continue to talk about this as a community, but thanks everyone for all your input, and yeah, I guess that's the end of the meeting. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Jane, for answering so many questions.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks all.